start the recording. All right, excellent. And then we'll just go ahead and get started. So welcome again to those that are joining us. And it's such a pleasure to have Alyssa and Courtney join us for the 5th installment of our series, The Art and Science of Making Meaningful Moments, Subtle Strategies, and Creative Conditions for Effective and Uplifting Facilitation. And today's session is entitled Creating Conditions for Compassionate and Resilient Community Work. So I'll just jump into introducing our speakers. Alyssa Stephens is a skilled facilitator with nearly a decade of experience in consulting, nonprofit administration, and local government. Her facilitation style brings together elements from education, social science, team science, and public deliberation to help teams communicate, innovate, and activate. And then Courtney Ngai is a chemist and educator by training and uses her scientific interpersonal skills to support teams to establish a positive and productive culture. By helping teams think about their process, she supports them in making progress toward their desired goals. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our speakers, Courtney and Alyssa. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having us, Christine, and welcome to everyone who's on the call. We are very, very excited to chat with you all and to share some of the best practices from our prior experiences. So I'm just going to start sharing my screen now. Give me one moment to get that up. Is everyone able to see the slides? Great, thank you so much, appreciate that. So as Christine mentioned, today we're here to talk with you about compassionate and resilient community work, and our tagline for today is From Misconnection to Happily Ever After, and you're gonna have to wait a little bit to see what we mean by that. But let's start off with talking about what is compassionate and resilient community work. And so we just wanted to settle on a little bit of a definition that we will be using to guide the rest of our conversation today. And so when Alyssa and I are talking and thinking about compassionate, resilient community work, we are thinking about collaborations between academic and community groups that recognize the power of combining community expertise and scientific knowledge, that honor the skills and strength of each group in the collaboration, that understand the needs and capacity of each group, and that work towards goals that benefit all parties. So this is a bit of the lens through which we'll be approaching the rest of the presentation when it comes to thinking about compassionate and resilient community work. We feel that these are practices, the practices that we share will lend itself to that goal. And we have found in our prior experiences that this does not always happen, these goals that we have up here, and that compassionate and resilient community work is often missed. We don't often get there. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Alyssa.
Thank you. Yes, so as someone who has kind of bounced back and forth between the nonprofit world and the academic world, what I have, when I was thinking about this, when we were preparing for this presentation, we really kind of identified with this idea of a misconnection where, maybe the good intentions were there, but we just aren't quite getting to that point of real collaboration and of real shared leadership. And so if anyone is familiar, this is something that still happens, but there was a phenomena back in Craigslist days of a misconnection. And the idea was that you would post on usually Craigslist about a chance encounter that you had with someone out in the world. And the hope was that somehow this other person would also be looking on Craigslist at the Misconnections ads and would reach out to you and connect to you. So I've got an example up here of a couple that met during a museum outing. And the hope was that, they didn't exchange information. They didn't make that full connection when they were there, but man, they really wish that they had done something to strengthen this relationship and really kind of codify it. And so we are going to be playing around with this concept of a misconnection this morning and using it as an opportunity to talk about maybe some of the ways that past collaborations have not quite met the mark of compassionate and resilient community work before we jump into some of our content for the day. So I went ahead and put together an example from some of my work of what a misconnection might look like for a research team. So we were a high-powered research team interested in rapidly manufacturing and distributing vaccines around the world. You were, well, we didn't even bother to invite you to our grant writing retreat. Then we realized that no one in our group had experience with community distribution and trust in vaccines. If you're still out there, please let us put your names on our grant and we'll figure out the relationship later. So this is a group from back in 2019. So prior to, thank you, thanks, Christine. Prior to the pandemic that we're experiencing today, we're facilitating a retreat for a group that had all of these high-powered scientists and recognized that they didn't have anyone to actually help with that distribution once they finished the manufacturing. So taking this concept, we are going to go ahead and have you hang out in breakout rooms for just a few moments. So we're going to give you 10 whole minutes in your breakout rooms, and we're going to make them relatively small because we're hoping you're going to achieve 3 things. So first, we want each person to give just about a 30-second introduction so you know who you're in the room with, give you about 2 minutes or so to complete those introductions. The second will be just about sharing some stories. Where have you seen compassionate, resilient community work as the intention, but maybe not as something that was actually achieved? This is really kind of some opportunity to share your war stories of what's happened in the past. And then we'll give you a 2-minute warning, and we'll ask you to take one of those misconnections, one of those stories from your past, and write it into that misconnections framework to share with the rest of the group. So we are going to go ahead and get you all into breakout rooms and give you your 10 minutes to discuss some of the misconnections you may have had in the past with community groups.
Christine, are we ready to jump into breakout rooms?
Yeah, I'm going to open them now, and
Awesome.
yeah, here we go.
Thank you.
I'm going to move I'm going to move some folks. Huh.
We've got a couple of people in rooms all by themselves.
Yeah. Can you guys see this too?
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nice. That was good.
Let's see. Do we have anybody else?
Looks like Ruth is now
Okay.
in the room.
I'll move her to 6.
Perfect.
And I'm going to move Allie to 2.
We just had a couple of folks join us now.
Okay. Great. Let's get Mike into room 1.
Mike, we're in breakout rooms right now. We'll go ahead and send you off and let your group explain to you what's happening.
Okay. Looks like Ellie has not joined, but okay. Do you guys have a timer going?
Yes, a mental one. Yeah.
Okay. Let me know when you want me to give them like a 60-second or any warnings.
Perfect. Alyssa, did you see Gemma's comment in
Yes.
chat?
Yeah,
I
I
don't
was going to
have
address
any.
that. Yeah, what I was going to say as we transition was just that, let me. All right, welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you had fun and had an opportunity both to meet someone new who you maybe haven't gotten to speak with in the past, and also share some of your stories of misconnections and community work in the past. I do want, if folks have their misconnections typed up, please just take a second and go ahead and put those into the chat. If anyone would like and feels so called to speak out loud and share your misconnection, go ahead and raise your hand and let me know, and I'm happy to let you come on the mic. Otherwise, we'll take just a second to let folks put those into the chat. As you're doing that, I will go ahead and answer one of the questions that came in through the chat. Specifically from Gemma about whether there were papers on compassionate and resilient community work. And I'll share that, Courtney and I, as we're going through, we're going to share some references with you and some different disciplines that we've pulled from in order to make this presentation. But this idea of compassionate and resilient community work is one that we've kind of developed between the two of us, and you've given us the inspiration to maybe publish a paper on it in the future. So thank you, Gemma. All right, I'm not seeing, oh, there we go. All right, there we go. We're starting to see some of those come through, so thank you. Good, so we're seeing some themes around, themes in the chat from trust, which I think kind of mirrors some of the themes from the misconnection that I shared. As folks are getting those typed up, let's go ahead and continue on, and hopefully folks will be willing to share some of those misconnections as we go. So in keeping with the theme of kind of misconnections, which is, this idea of something that could had so much potential, but just wasn't quite there, we're really thinking about kind of flipping that on its head and talking about writing your own happily ever after. And so we're going to break this up into, the beginning of your story, the middle, and the end, with the knowledge and the understanding that this is really a process. And so we're going to be kind of referencing back to our points throughout and really understanding that this is something that takes constant work, constant editing, and that you really never get to the point of happily ever after. So when we think about writing your story in the beginning, one of the big pieces is really identifying your main characters. And this is something that we see quite a bit, and I think we saw in Megan's example of a misconnection and in mine, was that we as speaking as scientific teams don't always do a great job of including those community representatives in the core team and really getting folks involved right from the very beginning. I included an example of a core periphery network for folks who are familiar with social network analysis. We use these diagrams a lot to talk about team structure. And these types of networks are great because they allow you to bring a lot of different types of community expertise, different skills, different knowledge to bear. And so you do want to have this core periphery structure, and you likely will have community partners who are out on that periphery. But what we often see is that they're only on the periphery, and those community partners aren't necessarily being brought into that core group. And so a big piece of that is really starting with those community partners in mind. My suggestion and what's worked well for me in the past is working potentially with social scientists. They often have, speaking as a social scientist myself, we often have connections in the community. There are usually a few, at least, in different departments who are working on some of this very specific local work and may have some of those connections. The other options for those in a land grant university would be extension agents who may have some of those really key community connections, not only in the town where your university is, but also in some of those kind of smaller communities in outer lying areas. And so those are both great resources to really start to build those connections. The other tip is really thinking about opportunities for communities to define and direct research. And that this really, again, gets to the idea of having communities involved from the very beginning. Often what I see is that people, they already have the team put together and they say, oh, we need a representative from the community to help us with this project that we've already defined. Maybe we even already got the grant for it. And now we want to go out and ask the community to be a part of this thing that we've already built. Not everyone has a great trust relationship with universities and community groups. There's a long history of universities being really extractive and using, in some senses, community groups to gain data, and then they're receiving all of these career gains and these accolades, and not necessarily reinvesting some of that back into the community that they really relied on to do their research. And so really thinking about those opportunities to spend time with community groups to show that sustained involvement, not just we show up when we have a big idea or we show up when we have some money that we need to spend, but really thinking about those true relationships and concrete commitments that can help community groups have a better sense of trust that academic groups have some real investment in not just trying to achieve the goals of their grant, but also in really investing in the community and making it something that's meaningful for them.
And so one sort of practice that teams can adopt when they're entering these sorts of collaborations that you can start with in the beginning is really viewing differences as strengths. And this is a bit of a mindset and assumption that you're making that diversity along many dimensions, such as race or ethnicity, age, gender identity, ways of knowing, work experiences, different ways of processing information, all of these differences can lead to a stronger, more productive and impactful group. And so when you really put this assumption into practice, this involves, group members being encouraged to share their different perspectives and sharing how their experiences are informing, their what they're putting forth or how they like to process things or the types of structures that they're used to encountering and that would be beneficial to move the work forward, and to really encourage this sort of, okay, well, what are all of the different options, or what are all of the different ways our members can contribute to this collaboration and then to the work as well, and valuing the different perspectives and how they, by considering the multiple different perspectives, that in the end will produce a result that is more informed by the different perspectives that have been brought to the table, and which can have a greater and more lasting impact.
So the next step in really setting the stage, and I want to give a shout out to Marissa. I'm so glad that you're on the line today because, the Toolbox Dialogue Initiative, and I've put some information down at the bottom to kind of cite some of my sources, has really been a great tool that I've been able to work with in the past to really get people on the same page, to really talk about your biases, your perspectives, and explicitly discuss terminology and acronyms. And that's something that is really important anytime you're working across disciplines. And so this is something that we talk about with interdisciplinary scientific teams all the time, but it's also incredibly important whenever you're working with community groups, because we often forget how different the academic world can be from the nonprofit world or from other spaces. And so really taking the time from the very beginning to talk about some of those assumptions, to acknowledge some of the different scales that you might be working on. Often our research is focused at a more broad macro level where, community work can be very, very local, very, very specific, and very, very personal. And so how do you reconcile these bigger picture goals with some of these really more immediate and more direct work goals that you have? So creating a shared language is one of those pieces. And then again, developing those shared goals that meet the needs of all team members. And I think that, you know, the wonderful examples that people have been sharing in the chat really highlight this, that often we see community partners as a tool for their networks, that, oh, well, we have the information and they have the connections. And so if we are able to create whatever tool, if we are able to, you know, develop whatever solution, then all we have to do is give it to this community partner and they can give it to their networks. And really, you want it to be much more integrated than that, so that you have these shared goals together and you're making sure that in addition to, you know, whatever goals are identified in your grant, you're thinking about what the community would like to achieve and what they see as, you know, the highest and best purpose to be working towards. The last piece that I'll put a plug on there is that these are both great places to consider hiring a facilitator. You know, reaching out to the folks who do the Toolbox Dialogue Initiative to have some of those conversations specifically about the framework that you're approaching for your work, you know, your ethics, your model of thinking, as well as developing some of those shared goals. So I put both, again, the Toolbox Dialogue Initiative without permission, so I apologize. I hope they don't mind. And then also the Facilitation Guild website, which is the group that Courtney and I both work out of.
Yeah, and continuing along this vein of setting the stage, we also wanted to bring shared leadership, the concept of shared leadership, to the table. And this, you know, pairs so nicely with setting those shared goals and examining assumptions and biases that you're bringing, that individuals are bringing to the table, and really uncovering that and digging into, like, well, how will this impact our group functioning? And so shared leadership is this concept where, you know, you're kind of removing that leader follower binary. There's not just like one leader and everyone else is a follower. And it really emphasizes having individuals who have the relevant expertise take on leadership roles throughout the project. And so what this looks like in action, you know, involves creating structures that allow more people to take on responsibility in leadership roles, right? And so this could be creating structures that are checkpoints throughout the project where the team decides, hey, you know, this is the stage that where we're at in this project, and we're about to spend the next year working on these particular activities. Who is the right person or people to lead this portion of the project, right? And not assuming that there is one leader who should be leading all of the things, right? And to say and to invite others to really step up and be like, oh, I have expertise in that. I can lead that because of my experiences doing this. And like, this is maybe how I would lead this for the team. And really inviting others to step up and take on some of these traditional leadership roles and responsibilities. And, you know, this also would involve then, when other folks are stepping up, to really empower, just for the other team members to kind of step back and be like, oh, okay, I can recognize that Alyssa has this great experience in, you know, doing visioning. So I'm going to be the follower in this case and really give the power to Alyssa to determine how we're going about doing this, right? And so, and to value the work and the experience that these other folks are putting into the project. And this goes along with, you know, establishing that shared purpose or goal, because when you have a shared purpose or goal, more folks feel invested in taking on some of that responsibility that comes along with a leadership role, right? And I think an important thing that I want to note is that there are so many different types of leadership, right? There's so many variations on this, and I invite you to check out the reference that I included on this slide, because they list all different types of leadership. And, you know, shared leadership really is adaptive to what is going on with that particular project, right? So it's adaptive to the context, it's adaptive to the people who are present in the collaboration, it's adaptive to the goals. And so keeping in mind that, like, leadership might not look the same the entire way across the project, and that's okay, right? And we can just draw from the different types of leadership that are available in order to really help move the project along in a meaningful way for participants.
So we wanted to incorporate just some brief examples of some of the good things that we've seen in our work, in addition, or good adaptations that we've seen in our work, in addition to sharing some of the missed connections. And so I think that you know, an example of, in particular, of identifying this kind of shared leadership model, I've seen work well with a campus, community, and school district partnership, specifically around sustainability. And that group has been able to have a rotating cast of characters from those organizations. It's not always the same person who is leading those discussions and attending those meetings, but it's been able to be a really sustainable partnership because all of those folks have kind of identified a shared goal, that there is this this desire for work towards sustainability, and really for research-based practices to be incorporated into education and sustainability practices. And so through kind of building this structure, this kind of core periphery structure where there's always someone from each organization involved, and also kind of pulling in this rotating cast of characters from other organizations when there are different projects, that group has been able to be really sustainable and achieve some really wonderful things for sustainability and education here in Fort Collins, where I am.
So now we are going to the middle part of the story, which involves really the team working together and what happens when you're in these partnerships. And so one practice that I would like to offer up as a useful tool that you can use when bringing together a team, whether or not it's a team of all academics or academics and community members, or really anywhere in between, is the use of norms of collaboration. And these were originally developed by Garmston and Wellman, and are part of the Adaptive School book. And the project that I work on, we have adapted these a little bit, and I have a link to our website below on this slide that has more information about that. But the norms of collaboration are practices that are used by high performing teams, whether they know it or not, to create collaborative conditions. And so there are 8 norms of collaboration: pausing, paraphrasing, paying attention to self and others, practicing cultural proficiency, probing for specificity, presuming positive intentions, pursuing a balance between advocacy and inquiry, and putting ideas on the table and pulling them off. And so these are 8 practices that you can encourage teams to think about to help moderate how we're interacting with each other, right? And so how are we communicating with each other during a team meeting? And I know these are a little abstract in this list form right here, so I do want to give you an example of one of these in more detail. So the example that I chose was to go through putting ideas on the table and pulling them off. And so the intention behind this norm of collaboration is to really remind team members that when we are critiquing ideas, that's what we're critiquing, is ideas and not people, right? And so, ways to enact this particular norm are to provide facts and inferences, ideas, opinions, suggestions, but then you state your intention with this. You say, here is an idea I would like to offer up to the team to consider. And then everyone's like, great, this is an idea that, that Courtney is suggesting here. And you might then share why I'm offering up this idea, right? And then, sometimes what's also really important with this particular norm is to recognize when your own idea is maybe impeding progress, or you've decided, or the team has maybe talked about the idea and, decided that, okay, I think the cons might outweigh the benefits of this idea. And I might recognize this and say, oh, you know what? I don't think that my idea is going to help us move forward with this project. I'm actually going to take that off our list of options for right now, right? And so this is really shifting that focus to that we're working with ideas or opinions or facts, and not necessarily me removing the idea from the table does not make me a less contributing team member, right? Because, I offered that up to the team from the beginning, and that gave us something to work with, right? And so just really shifting the focus of our communication, right? And so, you know, by practicing these types of norms, we are giving our team members the opportunity to contribute in meaningful ways and in ways in which they feel heard and also respected, and really trying to create those types of collaborative conditions in which everyone can truly contribute. And so, you know, the way that we've practiced the norms of collaboration with other teams is to have teams, you know, discuss them. And then every meeting we chose one norm to practice explicitly for the rest of that meeting, right? Until we got really, really good at doing that. But explicitly talking about the different norms really helps us remind ourselves, oh, okay, I do need to think about how I'm participating in this meeting, right? I'm not just going to speak whenever something is on my mind, because perhaps that might be taking up airspace that other folks might need for this during this meeting, right? And just being intentional in how we interact with others.
All right, so the next piece kind of harkens back to my earlier points about not just using your community partners for their networks. And I think, you know, what we see a lot is that there's this very distinct divide between research and implementation, and they don't necessarily cross over very frequently. There's a focus first on the research, on development, on, you know, kind of creating the solution, and then you switch modes. And really what we often see works best is when those things are considered together, when you use more of what's called a design thinking model, which does come from kind of business and manufacturing. And so it may not be a comfortable topic for people to think about, but it really focuses on having that really in-depth understanding of what your user, your end user needs, and how that product or that solution will be used as you're designing. And so it's not about identifying and saying, this is the best solution, and all I have to do is convince people to use this best solution. It's about involving people, involving your community partners, involving people with lived experience into that process so that they can ask questions, provide feedback, and really be a part of not just the implementation, not just the how do we make this work in the real world, but part of that design so that you really see better success with your projects and collaborating with the community. The last piece that we'll talk about in working together is really building in just frequent opportunities for communication. And I think, you know, the norms of collaboration that Courtney mentioned really speak to this as well, that really you need an environment of transparency, of accountability. In particular, I think one thing that's really important, and this is important when you're thinking about working with graduate students or junior scientists as well, but for community partners, having those open and honest conversations about capacity. Nonprofit organizations often are working with really small budgets, with really small staffs. And so how do you have those conversations about capacity and about whether the work that is going on is still kind of within the boundaries of what they can support? How do you make it easy for community members to be involved and not make it a challenge and a burden for them to be a part of the particular process? The other piece is making sure that communication tools are accessible to everyone. You know, I think this is something that I've noticed in working in different arenas is that different industries, different groups have different preferred communication tools. So, for example, Slack is something that's really, really popular that I've seen a lot in the academic world. People, you know, universities love using Slack channels. And I haven't seen that used quite as frequently in some of the other nonprofit and community groups. And so, you know, that's something that, yes, it's easy to set up a free account for, but just making sure that you're using tools that work for everyone, that fit within everyone's life, and really talking about what those communication channels should be for your group, and not just expecting your community group to adapt to the tools that you are used to and the tools that you like using in your work. As far as tips for team meetings, and I think these are, again, things that we just share from team science in general, but become particularly important when you think about those potential power imbalances that may come from working with academics and community groups. Making sure that everyone is sharing in every meeting. Often we do that through through having some sort of social question, introductory question, or ending question that everyone gets the chance to speak. That's going to really promote that sense of belonging and collaboration, even if people aren't central to some of the research portions of what you're working on. Incorporating both those tactical and strategic elements, I think is really important as well, so that even if you are in a phase that maybe doesn't have as much opportunity for community feedback or as much community involvement, that you're still making that connection back to why those community partners are at the table, why they're there, why they're important, and how they are still contributing to your goal as a team. And then lastly, openly discussing any snags and barriers in addition to celebrating successes and progress, I think is really important. Again, just building those trusting relationships, having that open dialogue so that you can say, hey, I'm really having trouble with this, and saying, community partner, do you have any insight for this? Do you have any ideas from your world that may help contribute to this problem? And vice versa, I think is really important and really sets up those strong, lasting relationships.
And here I'd like to share a story of a group that I worked with. A colleague and I were asked to facilitate several half-day retreats for a group that had been working together for a really long time, but they had this big new project and they needed some support in, just think how to conceptualize this new project. And they were self-described as a team of friends who all enjoyed working together. It was between a CSU partner and a Fort Collins partner was a collaboration. But they had long-lasting relationships between many of them, and they were already regularly meeting together. So, could we just come and, facilitate some different structures for them to make progress on this project. And so as part of that, we actually did introduce the norms of collaboration, even though they were self-described as a very happy team. And we saw that they were a wonderful team who was very collegial, and they had fun together, and we had fun with them, and it was a great time. But we did intentionally include those norms of collaboration and talked about them at the beginning of each of those half-day retreats. And at the end of the project, or towards the end of the project, one of the group members actually pulled me and my co-facilitator aside and said, I just wanted to thank you for those norms of collaboration, asking everyone to pause after they've, put an idea out there has really given me more of a chance to process, because I am an internal processor, and I felt like the conversation often moves so quickly that I was never able to add my ideas out there because I didn't have enough time to process it before the conversation moved on. Right. And so people just thought I was agreeing with all of these ideas. And in reality, I was just like really trying to think things through, but didn't have the time and space to do so in these meetings. And so we were happy to hear that. But what was even more wonderful was that at the last retreat, one of the group members actually commented and said, these past couple of retreats have really made me realize that this one of my team members, I didn't realize, how much you had to say about a lot of these topics, and we weren't giving you that space. He was self-reflective in recognizing that, he often was quick to externally process his own ideas in front of the entire team and to take up some of the airspace, and it was unintentionally inhibiting other group members from participating. And he was recognizing his own habits and was appreciative of the other team member who was now contributing her ideas to the conversation. And so it was just a very small adjustment, and they were friends before and friends after. So just to say, everyone can learn some new habits for how we interact in our team meetings.
All right, so we are moving on to our final section and really thinking about some of those happily ever after endings. So how do you close out potentially community and academic partnerships? So we're terming it what a graceful exit looks like. This is something that we've kind of talked about in a few points throughout our presentation, that often campus and community partners are working on different timescales. And so understanding what your timescale is, whether it be a grant project that will last for 5 years, or a shorter term project that may only last for a single semester and involve a specific group of students. Really acknowledging and being upfront about those different timescales is really important to be able to have those conversations about how community partners and organizations can continue the work after a grant or project ends. What you don't want is to get to the end of the time period for your campus partners to walk away and leave your nonprofit or community partners feeling left behind, maybe feel like they've been left with expanded responsibilities or expanded scope of work and not necessarily have the support and resources that they had during that grant period. And so a lot of this is just about having those really explicit conversations early and throughout, and really having a clear and open understanding of what that's going to look like. Another important piece of this is discussing what failure looks like in addition to planning for success. So, it's great to be able to plan for, maybe you've got your community partners together, you're working on this process and you're like, yes, we're going to write this grant. It's going to be great. We have our shared goals. We have our shared leadership structure. We've got everything planned out. That's wonderful. And it's really exciting to think about what a successful grant application might look like and what capacity you need for that. But it's equally important, I think, to talk about what it looks like if you don't get that funding, or if you don't get, whatever resource that you were hoping to bring to bear. What does that look like? How can you still carry forward that relationship with community members? How can you still continue to support, even if that funding resource isn't there? And that's really where some of these conversations, I think, about capacity building become really important, that often we're very, very focused on funding as the thing that nonprofits or community groups need. And that's what we're bringing to the table as academics. We have this $1 million grant that we're bringing to the table, and it's going to make such a huge difference for this community group. But really thinking about the ways that, in addition to, building financial capacity, what are the ways that that academic work can support the capacity building of, different skills, building up different networks so that folks have resources, have resilience, if the funding isn't there. And so really kind of having those conversations and talking about what does it look like if the campus partner is no longer involved, and recognizing that there are some scenarios where maybe a center or a nonprofit is being created as part of this that will last in perpetuity. It just becomes really, really extra important to talk about and discuss and plan for the closeout process here.
And, most projects are going to involve some sort of reporting at the end of their period, right? Most sort of collaborations will have that sort of final, report out or summary that they need to do. And so considering who each group needs to answer to, right? And so that's going to look different for the community versus academic partners. And so that could include the funding agency or board members or specific community boards and whatnot. And so thinking about in advance, what types of project data or communication do stakeholders need? And do any of these overlap between the academic and the community stakeholders, right? And so can we create reports or communications that serve the needs of both groups who are participating? And thinking about it from the very beginning, can some of the project outcomes be designed so that they also fulfill any reporting needs, right? So you could disseminate your project findings through a website, right? And that could be beneficial to both of the partners who are in the collaboration. And this is also a really important time to remember to celebrate success, right? And that also leads back to continuing that meaningful partnership between the academic and community stakeholders, and thinking about like, wow, how far have we come, right? What have we accomplished? And two ways to achieve these, there are two structured activities that I want to offer up as suggestions, is completing this activity called What, So What, and Now What. And this is a guided activity that prompts reflection on current progress and helps members to decide what sort of adjustments might be needed to reach goals. And you could use that then to figure out, well, what types of data do we already have for our project, right? And another one is appreciative interviews. And so this is where you're focusing on recognizing success and what is going really well. And you can use this, you know, in the beginning of a project to help recognize the skills that folks are bringing in, or you can use it at the very end of a project to identify the success and the progress that the team has made and to celebrate the project and everyone who's been working in the project. And these are both activities that are coming from liberating structures.
So I know we're running short on time, so I'll just take 60 seconds to share just a brief real life story for a project that I worked on. You know, I think a big piece of this closeout process is really thinking about that reporting and how you can you know, provide data and access to information for different people. And so I was working on a project that was you know, supporting nonprofits and working with a lot of kind of local entrepreneurs and local business networks. And one of the things that we did was, in addition to kind of creating this big picture grant report to say, here are the scientific outcomes that we saw and the research that we did. We also developed individual reports for each one of those sites so that they could really look at the local level on what the program achieved over time and how it helped build local capacity and local entrepreneurship networks. And so it was a great way to both close out and make sure that our academic partners had what they need, but also make sure that in addition that those community partners are getting what they need. And then those community partners were able to use those individual reports to build their own capacity by applying for other grants and other funding to continue to support the work that had been going on for the past 2 years. All right, so we left you a whole 60 seconds. If you want to ask questions now, you know, you've got 60 whole seconds to do it. No, I know we have some office hours next week. So same time next Tuesday, you'll have an email, a Zoom link in your email. So we'd love to have folks come and chat with us a little bit, talk about some of the points that we brought forward. We also provided some resources on the screen so that you can reach out to us individually if you would like to chat. Courtney, any other closing thoughts?
No, I just want to say thank you so much for attending. It was great to be able to chat with you all and to hear your stories of Misconnections.
Thank you so much, everyone. We'll see you next week, hopefully